This is Adam Schabel with Dr. Joanna Ganning in the Urban Affairs College. So, Dr. Ganning, I saw you were featured on the Cleveland State website about some of your research that you're doing. So, could you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah. I predominantly research urban and regional economic development. I got started in the field. I'm from West Virginia. I'm a fourth generation West Virginian, and growing up there, you understand that economic development is tightly tied to natural resources and extractive industries. And by the time I was ready to go to college, I felt like there's got to be a better way to make sure we keep food on the table for West Virginians, and I wanted to be part of that solution. So I went to college, and the lab sciences weren't for me, but through a series of internships I was really lucky to get, I found urban planning and came to do economic development in urban and regional planning. So I started by looking at regional systems and regional economics, and then I've had this series of life experiences where I've been able to live in Paris and Phoenix and Salt Lake City and St. Louis and here, and so intellectually and physically over time, my home has come to be urban. And so today, a lot of my research focuses on the systems of economic development that work to promote equity and access to opportunity for vulnerable and marginalized populations in these settings.
So what is it like living in so many places? I mean, how is it? Yeah, I mean, what's that like?
There are some things about it that are difficult. It's hard to start over. It's hard to find a new dry cleaner and a dentist and all those just logistical parts of life. That stuff can be difficult. But it has been enriching to my life. I've learned so much, and the perspective that you get from seeing how different cities and different groups of people solve problems or engage in conversations, or how systems can have impacts for populations in different places based on how they work, has taught me a lot about urban studies, about economic development, place-based policy, people-based policy, and industry-based policy. So in the industry part of that, I've looked at things like the economic impacts of prisons, the impacts of the beer industry on community and economic development, which there's still a lot to study in that particular area. I've done a lot of work at looking at transportation and the impacts of transportation, which is sort of in this ballpark, sort of not, I guess. And those are a lot of fun because the industries themselves are really different from industry to industry in terms of how labor is structured within an industry. So if you think about beer, for example, and this is one of the things I would like to know, but I have not yet figured out. If you think about a large national company like an Anheuser-Busch or some company like that, and think about what the labor economy in that kind of industry might look like in terms of what percentage is management, what percentage is professional marketing services, what percentage is logistics. And then think about a local brewery. Look at, we've got, 40 or something here in Cleveland at least. Yeah. So look at one of those and then ask those same questions. If you look at the employment in this industry, what percentage of this group of people is engaged in research and development, logistics, marketing, serving, all those different things? And I'm interested in understanding the different economic impacts of those two approaches to distributing beverages across America. But then the local beer industry also has this really unique ability to help shape local sense of self, right? So a lot of the names of beers are references to local things. Sometimes they're funny references to local things. And the impact that may have on the community development of sense, I think is interesting.
Okay, and so I feel like this is kind of, I guess, a general question, but you do all this research and you collect all this research, and what can you use that research for, and what can it go towards?
Different things. I have research that's in transportation sometimes and economic development and different things. So one example that's recent that answers your question is from the transportation side of my work. And I did this project, it was published a couple years ago, looking at the data that underlies it's a system called, or a database called the Location Affordability Index. It's put out by HUD. It was developed at a consulting firm prior to that. And part of what's in it, which is used in other federal systems also, but part of what's in it is data about how people get to work. And so I took this database apart and I looked at all the pieces to it and assessed the quality and the reliability of it. And one of the things I discovered was that the data about how people get to work is almost universally unreliable at the neighborhood level. And in that project, we were partnered with the RTA here in Cleveland. And this was of interest to them, because when the RTA is considering how might we change service to best serve the people of Cleveland and get people to work, they need to know where people live who are taking transit. So for them, that practical knowledge of saying we need to advocate for better data around these things can be useful. Some other work I've done that's been more applied has done things like advising on zoning ordinances for cities. So it was a really fun project. I worked with this group that wanted to see the redevelopment, or it was actually a greenfield, so the development of about 100 acres. And their vision for it was a place where multiple generations could age in place. They could have neighborhood services and amenities like food or entertainment, those kinds of things, where you wouldn't have to drive an hour to get to whatever it was. But the zoning necessary to make that possible was not something that had been considered politically feasible in that setting. And so they worked with me to produce analyses about what it would mean economically and environmentally to have a zoning code that allowed that kind of development, and to learn how to talk about zoning and physical development in a way that appeals to multiple audiences. So that was a very practical application for urban planning research.
That's really interesting. So the certain companies, like you said, the RTA, so they can use your research for their benefit, of course. Mm-hmm. They can do that. They can.
Yeah, and the RTA has a new partnership with Cleveland State that just came out. One of my colleagues, Nick Zingali here, has a big project that he's starting on with RTA and some other folks around the university. We have a great relationship with the RTA.
That's interesting.
Before I came here, I was at the University of Utah. We worked with the Transit Authority there as well. On similar kinds of projects. Okay. They wanted to know, if we build a commuter rail system, what are the impacts in a variety of ways of that kind of system? And those are the kinds of things I'm equipped to analyze.
Oh, cool. So are there any big projects you're working on at the moment, or?
Yeah. About a year and a half ago, I put together a faculty working group on regionalism. This is of great interest to me because I really believe that sprawl is a huge threat to Cleveland, if not the largest threat to the sustainability of Cleveland. As the regional population is steady or even declines, we continue to build at our urban fringe, at the suburban fringe. And this has huge implications for job accessibility, for vulnerable and marginalized populations, the ongoing environmental degradation associated with it. There are enormous issues of fiscal sustainability that apply across the region when we continue this way. So I put together this faculty working group that it's within this college. I have learned so much from my colleagues about this, and collaboration is a lot of, it's very beneficial to the research process. And as a group, we've worked together, and we are focusing in now on questions of wanting to understand how you align local decision making with regional priorities. Local government officials are beholden to their constituents. They have to act with local self-interest. And very often, for a wide variety of reasons, that local self-interest contradicts the objectives we may have for the broader region. And we want to work at that intersection to enable better public decision-making and information sharing and collaboration. And so we have applied for some funding on that, and we continue to research it as a group. I've learned a lot from them.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. So are there any projects that you have in the works, or maybe you would want to do for the future? Have you thought about that at all, I'm sure?
Absolutely. One of the projects I'm just getting started on right now, one of my, somebody academically I've looked up to for a long time, who's emeritus faculty now from Wayne State, his name's George Galster. He wrote in a paper a couple years ago this hypothesis that shrinking cities are not the mirror image of growing cities. So as Cleveland loses population, you don't unwind the growth process. You don't do it in reverse. It's not a mirror image of what happened when we were growing. The processes of urban change are quite different, actually, than what they would be if they were unwinding the growth processes. And I have a project I'm just starting right now to get a better understanding on some of the factors and some of the drivers of the difference between that, the difference between what would happen if you unwound the growth process and what happens in reality, to understand, again, how you protect and serve vulnerable and marginalized populations, especially in this context where resources may be declining and shifting outward and outward from a core. And so I'm engaging this as I do a lot of things through quantitative data, spatial econometrics, and building models around regional change in the context of decline.
Oh, great. All right, well, thanks a lot for meeting with me today, Dr. Ganning. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for coming in.
This has been Adam Schabel reporting for the Cleveland Stater.